A poor little girl walks into a restaurant carrying an empty plate and asks the billionaire, "Could you give me a little bit of your food for my hungry little brother?" His answer makes everyone cry. Michael Carter looked out the window of the Chateau Rouge, watching the city lights sparkle like fallen stars. The restaurant was a symbol of exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers reflected the soft lighting, silverware clinked delicately against imported porcelain, and polite conversations floated among tables occupied by people who never needed to check the price on the menu. He rotated the wine glass between his fingers, feeling strangely empty. Around him, couples celebrated anniversaries, executives closed deals, all immersed in that world of abundance. Michael had a table for 4, but he was alone. As always. "Sir, would you like to order now?" asked the waiter, appearing at his side with the practiced discretion of employees in places like that. "A few more minutes," Michael replied, not really feeling hungry. That was when he saw her, a tiny girl, no more than 5 years old, dark hair tied in a poorly made ponytail, wearing simple, clean clothes that were clearly worn out. She held an empty plate in both hands, as if it were a precious treasure, and walked between the tables with a determination only very young children managed to have. Disapproving glances followed her as she made her way through the main dining area, completely oblivious to the whispers. The little one stopped at Michael's table, her big brown eyes staring at him fearlessly. She raised the empty plate to chest level and spoke in a clear voice that echoed more than it should in that refined environment. "Could you give me a little bit of your food for my hungry little brother?" The entire dining room seemed to freeze. Silverware stopped mid-air, conversations died halfway, and every gaze fixed on the unusual scene. The maitre d' moved quickly, approaching with determined steps. "Young lady, this is a private establishment. We do not allow—" "Wait!" Michael's voice cut off the maitre d'. He looked at the girl, so small and yet so brave. "Where is your brother?" "Outside." She pointed to the door with her chin without lowering the plate. "He's 3 and he's really hungry. He's crying." For a moment, Michael was no longer at the Chateau Rouge. He was somewhere else, a long time ago, back when he was a skinny boy looking through a restaurant window, his stomach hurting with hunger, while people on the other side of the glass ate without even savoring what they had on their plates. "What's your name?" Michael asked, returning to the present. "Emily," she replied, clutching the empty plate even tighter. "Emily," he repeated, and something inside him shifted, like a long closed door being forced open. "Go get your brother. You two will have dinner with me." The maitre d' took a step forward. "Mr. Carter, with all due respect—" "Jacques," Michael interrupted, his voice low but firm, "set my table for 3. And bring the children's menu." Emily blinked several times as if trying to understand. "We don't have any money," she said with the straightforward honesty of a very young child. "I know," he simply replied. "Go get your brother." When she left, whispers erupted throughout the restaurant. Michael Carter, the man who appeared on the cover of Fortune 500, was inviting 2 street kids to dine in one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The maitre d' looked like he had swallowed a whole lemon. 2 minutes later, Emily returned, pulling along an even smaller boy by the hand, with the same dark hair but red, teary eyes. He seemed frightened by the environment and was partially hiding behind his sister. "This is my brother," Emily said protectively. "What's his name?" Michael asked, indicating the seats for them to sit. "Peter," she answered, helping her brother climb onto a chair that was too tall for his little legs. The waiter brought the menus, but Michael had already decided. "Bring a soup to start, then spaghetti with meatballs for the children, and the steak for me, and all the house sides." He looked at the kids. "Do you like dessert?" Peter, who had been silent until then, nodded timidly, still hiding behind his sister. "And chocolate ice cream afterward," Michael finished. When the food arrived, Emily and Peter ate as though they had never seen food before. Soup dribbled down Peter's chin as he tried to use a spoon too big for his small hands. Emily struggled to help her brother while also trying to eat her own meal. Michael didn't correct them. He remembered all too well what it was like to have an empty stomach for so long it began to ache differently. "Where are your parents?" Michael asked as they tackled the main course. Our mom died, Emily answered without pausing, tomato sauce staining her face. Her voice was strangely direct for a child so young. And our dad left. He abandoned us after she died. It's just me and Peter now. Michael sensed there was something odd in her reply, but he didn't push it. He let the children eat in peace, noticing how Emily, so small, always made sure her brother was well served before focusing on her own plate. When the ice cream arrived, the children's eyes widened at the size of the servings. Peter ate so fast he got ice cream headache, as Emily explained, pointing to her brother's furrowed forehead. Once they finished, both suddenly seemed embarrassed, as if they had only then realized where they were and what had happened. Emily wiped her mouth with the napkin and then did the same for her brother, showing surprising skill for someone her age. "Thank you, mister," said Emily, sliding off the chair and helping Peter do the same. "We need to go now." "Wait, I can..." But Emily was already pulling her brother by the hand, backing toward the door. "Thank you very much for dinner," she said in a small, hurried voice. "It was very good." Michael stood up, wanting to say something, to offer help, but the words stuck in his throat. In seconds, the children were gone, disappearing through the main door as quickly as they had entered. He sat back down, staring at the dirty, partially empty plates. The other patrons returned to their conversations, the moment of excitement forgotten. But Michael could not return to his own world. The image of those children, so small and vulnerable, yet astonishingly determined, was etched in his mind. Something had changed within him. A door he believed locked had swung open, and now old memories, along with new feelings, flowed like a river after a long drought. He paid the check and stepped out into the cold night. He searched for the children in the nearby streets, but they had vanished. Standing under the yellow glow of a street lamp, Michael knew he couldn't simply go back to his normal life and forget what had just happened. Somehow, those kids had awakened something he thought had died long ago. Michael's mansion was silent when he arrived. Automatic lights switched on as soon as they detected his presence, illuminating the immaculate, empty spaces. Everything there screamed luxury: Italian marble floors, paintings by renowned artists, furniture designed exclusively for him. He tossed his jacket over the couch and loosened his tie. Tonight, the mansion's walls seemed to close in on him. The faces of Emily and Peter appeared every time he shut his eyes. The tiny girl with that adult-like determination in her gaze, the frightened boy hiding behind his sister, and that empty plate, raised so hopefully. "They're okay," he muttered to himself, pouring a whiskey. "They probably have somewhere to stay." But he knew he was lying to himself. Emily's words echoed in his mind. "Our mom died, and our dad left. He abandoned us. Abandoned children, alone on the streets." Michael sat in the huge leather armchair, gazing out at the illuminated garden through the window. The house, which had cost millions, suddenly seemed absurdly large and empty. He closed his eyes. The children's faces melded with other, older, more painful memories. He was 8 years old. Rain poured heavily, and his thin coat did nothing to shield him from the cold. His mother was too sick to work, and the little money they had was gone. They hadn't eaten in an entire day. "Go to that restaurant and ask for something, Mike," his mother had said in a weak voice. "Tell them it's for a sick woman." He remembered how his legs trembled when he entered the place. The smell of food made his stomach hurt even more. And then the shame, the manager's look of contempt, the laughter from some customers, the way he was pushed back onto the street, empty-handed, humiliated. "We're not a charity," the man had said. "Leave before I call the police." Michael opened his eyes, his heart pounding. How could he have forgotten? How could he become part of that same world that once rejected him so cruelly? Years of single-minded focus on building his fortune, of a determination to never go hungry again, had gradually erased the boy he once was. In his pursuit to never again be that starving child, he'd lost something essential. The empathy he had once sworn never to abandon. He recalled the promise he'd made to himself long ago. "If I ever have money, I'll never ignore someone who's hungry." A broken promise, not by a single action but by years of neglect. By choosing not to see what was happening around him while he built his empire, Michael headed upstairs, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. Lying in his king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, he felt more uncomfortable than ever. His body was tired, but his mind wouldn't stop. Where were Emily and Peter now? Did they have a roof over their heads? Were they cold? Hungry? The hours passed slowly. On the digital clock beside the bed, the numbers changed. 11:47 p.m., 12:21 a.m., 1:36 a.m., 2:52 a.m. He dozed off a few times, only to awaken startled by dreams in which he heard the children calling for him. In other moments, he was a child again, pleading for help and being ignored. He remembered a particularly cold night when he slept under an overpass with his mother because they had nowhere else to go. The footsteps of people above them sounded like thunder. Each passing car briefly lit his mother's tired face, which, despite everything, tried to maintain a reassuring smile so as not to frighten him. "We'll be all right, Mike," she would say. "We're strong, you and I." The strength his mother had shown during those difficult times, Michael saw it reflected in Emily's eyes, a 5-year-old child taking on the responsibility of caring for her younger brother, facing a restaurant full of wealthy adults because her little brother was hungry. Michael turned over in bed, searching for a comfortable position that seemed impossible to find. The room, far too large, seemed to mock him tonight. The silence of the empty mansion amplified the storm inside his mind. The streets would be cold tonight. Around 5 in the morning, when the sky began to brighten through the curtains, Michael sat up in bed, sweaty and resolute. He couldn't go on with his normal life, pretending that encounter had never happened. He wouldn't be like the others who turned a blind eye. "I have to find them," he said aloud to the empty room. Michael got up and walked to the window, opening the curtains. The city was slowly waking up on the horizon, a rosy hue starting to paint the sky. Somewhere out there, 2 small children were facing the world alone. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt something so strong, so clear. It wasn't just guilt over his past, nor just compassion for their present. It was the absolute certainty he needed to do something, that the meeting hadn't been a coincidence. Michael clenched his fists, determined. He would start looking for Emily and Peter in the morning. He'd scour every corner of that city if he had to. He wouldn't rest until he found them. He looked at his reflection in the glass, superimposed over the awakening city. "You made a promise once," he told himself. "It's time to keep it." The sun had barely risen when Michael parked in front of the Chateau Rouge. The restaurant was still closed to customers, but he could see movement inside, staff preparing for another day of impeccable service. Michael knocked on the service door. A young man opened it, frowning when he saw him. "We're not open yet, sir." "I'm not here to eat," Michael interrupted. "I need to speak to someone about 2 children who were here last night." The young man looked confused for a moment, until he recognized Michael. "You're Mr. Carter, right? The one who invited those kids to dinner?" Michael nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "Do you know anything about them? The girl of about 5, the boy of about 3? "No, sir, I only saw them in here." Minutes later, Jacques, the maitre d', appeared, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Carter, how may I help you?" "Those children from last night. I need to find them." Jacques raised his eyebrows. "We have no information about them." That kind of incident is not common at the Chateau Rouge. The word incident made Michael press his lips together, but he held back. Did anyone see where they went after they left? Perhaps the staff at the entrance. Jacques called over a man passing by. "Pierre, did you see where those children went last night?" The man stopped, thinking. "I think they headed toward the park, sir. The girl was pulling the boy by the hand." Michael's heart sped up. "Which park?" "Lafayette Park, 2 blocks away, then left." "Thank you." Michael turned to leave, but Jacques stopped him. "Mr. Carter, if I may ask, why such interest in these children?" Michael looked at the maitre d'. "Because I made a promise to myself, a long time ago, that if I ever had the means, I wouldn't turn a blind eye to those who need help." Lafayette Park was larger than he'd expected. Green space, a small lake, a playground, and several benches. Michael began walking around, his eyes scanning for any sign of Emily and Peter. After 20 minutes with no success, he approached an older man feeding pigeons. Good morning. I'm looking for two small children, a 5-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. The girl has dark hair and is very protective of her little brother. Have you seen them here? The man shook his head. Haven't seen kids like that. But lots of people pass by here. Michael continued his search, stopping joggers, maintenance workers, and mothers with children. No one had seen Emily and Peter. He decided to expand the area. Leaving the park, he walked through adjacent streets, entering shops and cafes to ask around. His simple appearance, jeans and a casual jacket, helped him not draw too much attention, but he still received suspicious looks when he inquired about the children. "Why are you looking for these kids?" asked a grocery store owner, eyeing him warily. "I met them yesterday and they seem to be in trouble. I want to help." The woman gestured in a certain direction. "There's a small encampment under the Madison Bridge. Sometimes homeless people stay there." Following her advice, Michael noticed how the scenery changed the farther he got from the Chateau Rouge area. Buildings became less grand, the sidewalks more cracked, garbage more visible. The contrast was startling. Just a few blocks away from the restaurant where he'd spent hundreds of dollars on a meal, people lived in extreme poverty. Madison Bridge spanned a small, polluted river. Beneath it, Michael found a small makeshift camp. Tents made of tarps and cardboard, some old mattresses, belongings tied in plastic bags. 3 men sat around a small makeshift fire. They looked at him with distrust as he approached. "Good morning," he said, keeping some distance. "I'm looking for 2 children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 3. Have you seen them here?" A gray-bearded man answered, "What do you want with them?" "I met them yesterday. They seem alone. I want to help." The men exchanged glances. The bearded one spoke. "Haven't seen any kids here, but there's a shelter about 3 blocks east. Sometimes kids go there for food." "Thank you." Michael offered them some money. "For breakfast." The man accepted the bills. "You're rich, aren't you? I can tell by your shoes. They're too new." Michael glanced at his own feet. Even after choosing his simplest clothing, his shoes still gave him away. "I used to be poor," he said honestly. "I know what it's like." The man let out a short laugh. "No, you don't. Once you forget, you don't really know anymore." The words struck him hard. Michael nodded and walked away in the indicated direction. The shelter was a simple building with a worn-out sign. Hope House, Shelter and Soup Kitchen. A few people were having breakfast served by volunteers. The smell of cheap coffee and bread mingled with the smell of disinfectant. Michael approached a middle-aged woman who seemed to be in charge. "Good morning. I'm looking for 2 small children who might have come by. A 5-year-old girl named Emily and a 3-year-old boy, Peter." The woman studied him with experienced eyes. "And who are you?" "My name is Michael Carter. I met these children yesterday and I'm worried about them. They seem to be alone." "Mr. Carter, we respect the privacy of those who come here. If the children were here, I can't just give information about them to a stranger. I understand and respect that, but they're very young children, alone on the streets. The girl said their mother died and their father abandoned them." The woman's expression softened. "What do you plan to do if you find them?" "Make sure they're safe, that they have a place to stay, food, the basics." "Do you work for any organization?" "No, it's just me." "Mr. Carter, if these children truly are alone, the proper procedure would be to contact social services." Michael felt a pang in his chest. Social services meant bureaucracy, likely separation of the siblings. "I have the resources," he said quietly. "I can help them without involving the system. At least for now." The woman studied his face. "I haven't seen children matching that description in recent days, but there are other shelters around the city." Michael spent the next several hours continuing his search, going into more establishments, talking to more people. The answers were always the same. No one had seen the children, or they didn't remember. As the day wore on, Michael found himself in parts of the city he had never visited before. Narrow alleys, abandoned buildings, people sleeping in cardboard boxes. The poverty had always been there, just a few miles from his world of luxury. How had he ignored it for so long? He remembered his mother, how she had struggled to survive, to give him the bare minimum. How even in the worst situations, she maintained her dignity. "We're poor, Mike, but we're not less." Around noon, exhausted and frustrated, Michael stopped at a small diner to get something to eat. While waiting for his sandwich, he studied a map of the city on his phone, mentally marking areas he had already searched. The day passed with no results. When night fell, Michael realized he needed a more systematic approach. For a moment, he considered offering a reward, putting up ads, hiring private investigators. With his money and influence, he could mobilize considerable resources. But something made him hesitate. Drawing too much attention might scare the children away. And involving the authorities could lead to Emily and Peter being separated by the system. He decided it was best to continue searching on his own. He returned home, tired but determined. Tomorrow would be another day. "I'm not giving up," he told himself as he drove. "I'll find them." The next morning, Michael left even earlier. The sky was overcast, threatening rain. He returned to the same neighborhood, but this time with a different strategy. He focused on places where homeless children might look for food, small eateries, restaurant back doors, spots where leftover food might be discarded. He entered a modest bakery and showed a photo on his phone. He'd asked the Chateau Rouge's security for camera images showing Emily and Peter. "I've seen these little ones," said the lady behind the counter, adjusting her glasses to see the image better. "The girl came by yesterday, really early. She asked for leftover bread, but said she had no money. I gave it to her anyway. She looked so hungry." Michael's heart pounded. "Do you know where they went afterward?" "No, but they show up here from time to time. If they need food, this street has several places that give out leftovers." Michael thanked her and followed the street she indicated. The sky darkened, and a light drizzle began to fall. He pulled up his hood, wondering how Emily and Peter might be shielding themselves from the cold and rain. After almost an hour walking in the drizzle, he entered a small Chinese restaurant to take shelter. It was nearly empty, save for an elderly man eating soup in a corner. The owner, an Asian woman in her mid-50s, came to assist him. Michael showed her the photo on his phone and told his story. "Oh yes," the woman exclaimed, pointing toward the back door. "That girl comes almost every day. I always set aside leftovers for her little brother. She's very polite, always says, 'Thank you.' Actually, they were here about 20 minutes ago." Michael nearly dropped his phone in excitement. "Do you know where they went?" "They usually go that way," she pointed toward a side alley. "I think they take shelter there when it rains." Thanking her quickly, Michael went back out into the now heavier rain. The alley was narrow, flanked by old, run-down buildings. Some entrances were boarded up, while others seemed partially occupied. He walked slowly, checking every doorway, every entry. Rain ran down his face, soaking his clothes. The cold seeped into his bones, and he wondered how such small children endured this day after day. Then he saw them. In the gap between two buildings, under a makeshift roof made of scraps of cardboard, were Emily and Peter. They were huddled close together, trying to stay dry from the wind-blown rain in their precarious shelter. Emily had her arms around her brother, and a thin, dirty blanket covered them both. Peter looked pale, his lips slightly blue from the cold. Michael felt a lump in his throat. He approached carefully, not wanting to scare them. "Emily," he called softly. The girl looked up quickly, eyes wide with fear. When she recognized him, she looked confused. "You're the man from the restaurant," she said, pulling her brother closer protectively. "Yes, it's me. Michael, remember? I've been looking for you." Emily frowned suspiciously. "Why?" "Because I'm worried," Michael answered honestly, crouching down to their level. "You shouldn't be out here all alone, especially in this cold." Peter coughed, a weak, worrying sound. His eyes were half closed, as if he were very tired. "Is he sick?" Michael asked, the concern evident in his voice. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "He's been coughing since yesterday, and he's really cold." Michael slowly reached out to the boy, touching his forehead. It was hot, a stark contrast to his cold cheeks. "Emily, he needs help. Both of you need to get out of this cold, have a hot bath, real food." The girl seemed torn between fear and necessity. "We don't have anywhere else to go. I have a big house with empty rooms," Michael said gently, keeping his voice calm. "You can stay there." I have food, warm clothes, and we can take Peter to a doctor. Emily looked from her brother to the pouring rain, then back to Michael. Are you going to call the police? No, Michael promised. I just want to help you, like I did at the restaurant. Remember how good that hot meal was? Peter coughed again, and Emily pressed her lips together, making a tough decision. Okay, she finally said, but only because Peter's sick. Michael smiled, feeling immense relief. Let's go then. My car's nearby. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around Peter, lifting the boy into his arms. He was alarmingly light for his age. Emily stood, still clutching the thin blanket around her shoulders. Ready? Michael asked. She nodded, far too serious for a 5-year-old. She took the hand he offered, her small fingers cold against his palm. They walked through the rain to Michael's car. Emily observed everything intently, clearly scared but determined not to show it. Once they arrived, Michael settled Peter in the back seat, still wrapped in his jacket, and helped Emily up. You're going to be all right now, he said, turning the heater on full blast. I promise. As he drove through the city, Michael glanced at the rearview mirror occasionally. Emily sat tense, staring out the window as though memorizing the route. Peter had fallen asleep, his breathing slightly labored. They looked so small and vulnerable in the back seat. Michael gripped the steering wheel. For the first time in years, he felt he was doing something truly important. It wasn't about money, power, or success. It was about 2 children who needed help, the same kind of help he'd once needed and never received. The rain continued to fall as they left the narrow streets and entered the wealthier part of the city. Emily watched through the window, eyes widening at the tall buildings and luxurious homes. A completely different world from hers. Is it far? She finally asked, breaking the silence. No, we're almost there, Michael replied, feeling a strange nervousness. I think you'll like my house. There's plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Helena, makes the best soup in the world. Emily didn't answer, but her gaze reflected a mix of fear and hope, the look of someone who learned too early not to trust adults, but still couldn't fully silence the desire to believe. The gates of Michael's mansion opened automatically as the car approached. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes huge at the sight of the enormous house that appeared ahead. It looked like a fairy tale castle, with large windows, imposing columns, and a garden so impeccably manicured it almost didn't seem real. You live here? She asked, her voice barely audible. Yes, Michael answered, parking in front of the main entrance. It's too big for just one person, don't you think? Peter woke up when the car stopped, looking around in confusion. His cough sounded worse than before. The mansion door opened even before Michael stepped out of the car. Helena, the housekeeper, appeared with a worried expression. Behind her, 2 other staff members watched curiously. Mr. Carter, thank goodness you're back. We were worried about the rain and... She stopped upon seeing the children in the back seat. Oh my goodness. Helena, I need help, Michael said, opening the door so Emily could get out. This is Peter and this is Emily. They'll be staying with us for a while. Helena looked at the children, wet, dirty, with Peter clearly ill, and her maternal instincts took over. Let's get inside immediately. These kids need a hot bath and dry clothes. Emily held Peter's hand tightly as they entered the mansion. Their eyes traveled around the entrance hall. Marble floors, a crystal chandelier, the curved staircase leading to the 2nd floor. They looked minuscule in that grand setting. Have a bath prepared and set aside some clothes, Michael instructed his employees. And we need a doctor for the boy. He's running a fever. The staff moved quickly, though their expressions revealed confusion and surprise. It wasn't every day their boss, one of the richest men in the city, brought homeless children into his home. Helena knelt down to Emily's height. We'll take good care of you, sweetheart. First a warm bath, then dry clothes and a good meal. How does that sound? Emily didn't answer, just tightened her grip on her brother's hand. It's all right, Michael assured her. Helena will help you get cleaned up while I call a doctor for Peter. Somewhat reluctantly, Emily allowed Helena to guide them upstairs. As they climbed, the little girl kept looking back every few steps, as if afraid Michael might vanish. I'm not going anywhere, he promised, noticing her fear. I'll be here when you come down." On the second floor, Helena led the children to one of the guest rooms with an attached bathroom. One of the maids was already filling the bathtub. "Look at that, isn't it wonderful?" Helena said, trying to cheer them up. "You'll be clean and warm in no time." Emily stared at the huge bathtub with a mix of fascination and apprehension. "We've never bathed in a tub like that." "Well, today's your chance," Helena smiled. "May I help you?" After some hesitation, Emily nodded. Helena helped them undress, silently shocked by how thin they both were and by the small bruises on their bodies, marks of a harsh life on the streets. Carefully, she placed them in the warm water, showing them how to use soap and shampoo. They were tense at first, but soon Peter began to smile faintly, mesmerized by the foam. Emily stayed on guard, as if expecting something bad to happen at any moment. Meanwhile, downstairs, Michael was on the phone with his private doctor. "I need you to come immediately. It's an emergency," he explained. "A 3-year-old boy, possibly with pneumonia or something similar." The doctor promised to arrive in under half an hour. Michael hung up just as his personal assistant James arrived, looking visibly concerned. "Mr. Carter, what's going on? Helena called saying you brought children into the house." Michael took a deep breath, realizing how strange the situation looked from the outside. "Yes, 2 children who were living on the streets. The boy is sick, and I couldn't leave them out there in this rain, especially with him coughing." James adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I understand your concern, but there are proper procedures for these situations. Shelters, social services." "No," Michael said firmly. "We're not involving bureaucracy, at least not yet. They're staying here." "Mr. Carter, with all due respect, this could lead to legal complications. You don't have custody of these children, and—" "James," Michael's voice was calm but unyielding. "I know you're concerned about my interests, but I've already made my decision." James sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing when his boss was this resolute. "As you wish, sir. Should I cancel your meetings for the rest of the week?" "Yes, please, and James, thank you for worrying." When the children came back downstairs, they were unrecognizable, clean, with still damp hair, wearing new clothes hastily provided by Helena, who had sent a driver to buy children's items at a nearby store. Peter wore a blue tracksuit that seemed to swallow him, while Emily wore a t-shirt and pants that were obviously too big, but clean and comfortable. Michael smiled when he saw them. "Look at you. You look great." Emily didn't smile back, but her eyes seemed less frightened. Peter, despite his illness, looked more relaxed, holding Helena's hand as if he already trusted her. "The doctor will be here soon to examine Peter," Michael explained. "In the meantime, how about we eat something? You two must be hungry." Helena guided them to the kitchen, where the table was already set with a variety of simple but nutritious foods: hot soup, sandwiches, fruit, milk. Emily helped Peter sit down, both eyeing the food as though it were treasure. "Eat as much as you want," Michael encouraged. The children needed no further invitation. They ate hungrily, though Emily remained alert, eating more slowly and making sure Peter had enough before focusing on her own plate. The little girl chewed each bite as if memorizing the taste, occasionally reaching for more bread as though worried the food might vanish. Michael watched in silence, a flood of conflicting emotions washing over him. Seeing children that scared and hungry in his luxurious kitchen brought back memories he'd tried to bury, of how he himself once looked at food with that same combination of disbelief and desperate gratitude. He remembered his mother, splitting a stale loaf of bread into unequal parts, always giving him the bigger piece. "You're growing," she'd say. "You need to eat well." But he knew she herself went hungry to feed him. The sound of the doorbell broke his thoughts. Dr. Reynolds had arrived. The doctor, a kind-looking man in his 50s, examined Peter carefully. Emily didn't leave her brother's side for a second, watching the doctor's every move with suspicion. "He has bronchitis," Dr. Reynolds diagnosed after the exam. "Nothing too serious yet, but it could have become worse if he stayed out there in this weather. I'll prescribe antibiotics and some cough syrup." Michael nodded, relieved it wasn't more severe. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Doctor." When the doctor left, it was already evening. The children were clearly exhausted. Peter's eyes almost closing as he sat on the sofa. Emily, despite looking tired too, remained alert. "I think it's bedtime," Michael suggested. "Helena prepared a room for you." Helena led them upstairs again, to a large guest room where she had arranged 2 beds, one smaller, previously used years ago when Michael's niece had stayed over. Emily looked at the beds with white sheets and soft blankets as though they were objects from another planet. She helped Peter climb onto one of them and carefully tucked him in. "Are you okay staying here?" Helena asked. "I'll be just down the hall if you need anything during the night." Emily nodded timidly. "Thank you for the food and the beds." Helena smiled, touched by the child's politeness despite everything she must have gone through. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Sleep well." When Helena left, Michael entered to say goodnight. He found Peter already asleep, his breathing still a bit labored but more regular. Emily was sitting on the edge of the other bed, as if unsure how to handle so much comfort. "Everything okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Peter. Emily shrugged, looking down at her hands. "Why are you doing this? Why did you bring us here?" The question caught Michael by surprise, but he knew he owed her honesty. "Because when I was a kid, I went through hard times too. I was cold and hungry, and no one helped me." Emily lifted her eyes, studying his face as though trying to decide if he was telling the truth. "You were poor." "Yes, very poor. My mother did what she could, but sometimes it wasn't enough." "How did you get rich?" Michael smiled softly. "That's a long story. Maybe I'll tell you one day. Right now, it's time to sleep." He moved closer to tuck her in, but stopped, noticing she was still tense. Instead, he just pulled the blanket up so she could grab it whenever she felt ready. "Good night, Emily. I'm glad you're here." When Michael left, Emily finally lay down. The mattress was so soft she felt like she was sinking. The sheets smelled clean, a scent she barely remembered. It was so different from the places she and Peter had slept in recent months. Cardboard boxes, building alcoves, corners of shelters when they were lucky. On the other side of the room, she could hear Peter's breathing, gentler now that he was warm and medicated. For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to relax a little. Just a little. The following days established a surprisingly stable routine. Michael rearranged his commitments so he could be present, helping the children adjust to their new life. Helena took on the role of primary caregiver whenever Michael needed to work in his home office. She set schedules for meals, baths, and bedtime, a structure the children clearly had never experienced. "Lunchtime is always at noon," she explained patiently. "And you need to wash your hands before you eat." Emily found all these rules strange, but she tried hard to follow them, grateful for everything they were receiving. Peter, recovering quickly with medication and good food, adapted more easily, fascinated by every new aspect of the house. "Look, Emily," he exclaimed, pointing to the huge TV in the living room. "It has cartoons." On the 3rd day, Michael found Peter in the garden, playing with Max, the golden retriever usually kept with the gardener. The boy giggled every time the dog licked his face, a sound Michael realized he'd never heard before. Emily, however, remained cautious. Michael found her several times looking out the window, as if planning an escape. Or maybe, he thought, just making sure the outside world still existed. The household staff was divided in their reactions. Some, like Helena, embraced the children wholeheartedly. Others kept their distance, clearly uneasy about the unusual situation. James, Michael's assistant, did not hide his concern. "Mr. Carter, the company board called 3 times today. They're questioning your absence from meetings." "Tell them I'm dealing with personal matters," Michael replied, signing documents in his office. "Sir, with all due respect, this situation is irregular. You should consult a lawyer about custody of these children. There are legal protocols." "I understand, James." Michael lifted his eyes from the paperwork. "I'll deal with it when the time is right." Later that day, while Michael was checking emails, he received a call from Thomas Welford, his main business partner. "Michael, what on earth is going on?" Thomas's voice sounded irritated over the phone. "I've heard rumors you took street kids into your home." "They're not rumors, Tom, it's true." There was a shocked silence. "Have you lost your mind?" Do you know what kind of problems this can cause? What if these kids have family? What if the press finds out one of the city's richest men kidnapping children? I didn't kidnap anyone, Michael replied calmly. I found 2 abandoned children and brought them someplace safe. Mike, we're public figures. Everything we do has consequences. You should have called the authorities. The conversation continued in that tone, with Thomas insisting Michael was risking his reputation and potentially creating legal issues. When they hung up, Michael felt momentarily shaken. Perhaps Thomas was right. Maybe the proper solution was to turn the kids over to social services, where trained professionals could look after them. That night, as he walked down the hallway to his room, Michael stopped at the door to the children's room. Peter was sleeping soundly, his color healthy again. Emily, however, was awake, sitting on the bed, hugging her knees. "Can't sleep?" he asked, quietly stepping inside. She shook her head. "I was thinking." "About what?" "About when we'll have to leave." Her words hit Michael like a punch. In his world, people rarely spoke so directly and honestly about their insecurities. "Emily," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "you're not going anywhere unless you want to." She searched his face in the semi-darkness. "Really? Really? But what if you get tired of us? Our dad got tired." Michael felt a flash of anger at the man who had abandoned these children, followed by an absolute certainty in his heart. "I'm not going to get tired of you. I promise." Emily didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression shifted, a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, "Peter likes it here. He likes the dog. And you? Do you like it?" She shrugged. But it was a less defensive gesture this time. "It's nice to always have food." Michael smiled, recognizing that admission as the small but significant step toward trust that it was. Hours later, with all the mansion lights off, Michael was still awake. Thomas's and James's words echoed in his mind, blending with images of Emily and Peter. The legal complications, the potential problems, these were all real. But so was the bond that had started to form, fragile yet undeniable. He decided that in the morning he would call his lawyer. There had to be a legal way to keep the children under his care, and he would find it. He refused to let them go back to the streets, nor see them separated by the system. Down the hall in the children's room, Peter dreamed of the dog and Emily finally asleep, clutched a small pillow as though afraid someone might snatch it away during the night. But for the first time in a long while, their faces held the peacefulness of those who feel, at least temporarily, safe. Rain pelted against the mansion's windows, casting restless shadows on Michael's bedroom walls. He tossed and turned, trapped in a nightmare too vivid to be just a dream. In the nightmare, he was a child again, skinny, wearing clothes too big and shoes full of holes. He stood at the door of a huge house, knocking and begging for help. His mother was sick. They needed food. The people inside the mansion looked right through him, as though he were invisible, or worse, like a stain on their landscape that they preferred to ignore. "Please," the young Michael pleaded in his dream, "just a little bit of food. Anything." Then, in a cruel twist, he was no longer the begging child. He was the adult inside the luxurious home, turning his back on a small girl holding an empty plate in her hands, and behind her, a boy trembling with cold. Michael woke up with a start, heart racing, body covered in a cold sweat. For a moment, he was disoriented until the familiar shapes of his room came into focus in the dim light. He glanced at the clock, 3:42 a.m. He sat up in bed, running his hands over his face. It wasn't the first nightmare since he'd brought Emily and Peter into his home. Their presence was unearthing memories he had stashed away in some dark corner of his mind. Memories that his financial success and comfortable life had dulled but never truly erased. How could he forget? How could he live all these years in his bubble of privilege, knowing there were children, just like he had been, suffering on the streets, going hungry, cold, and scared? It was as though he had built a wall between the boy he'd been and the man he had become. And now that wall was crumbling down. Michael stood and walked to the window. The city lights glimmered in the distance, dots of brightness in the darkness. Somewhere out there, how many children were going through what Emily and Peter had gone through? How many just needed a chance like the one he eventually got. I can change that, he murmured to himself. I have the power to make a difference now. The next morning, Michael found Emily alone in the kitchen. The girl was on her tiptoes, trying to reach a box of cereal in the cabinet. He approached silently and grabbed it for her. "Thank you," she said, not looking directly at him. After a week in the mansion, Emily seemed a bit less tense, but she still maintained a guarded reserve that tugged at Michael's heart. "Where's Peter?" he asked, handing her a bowl. "He's still sleeping. He was coughing a bit at night, so I gave him the medicine the doctor said." Michael watched as she carefully poured cereal into the bowl, as though counting each flake. Even with abundant food available, Emily ate like someone who knew hunger, never wasting anything, always saving some for later. "You've always taken good care of him, haven't you?" Emily shrugged. "I have to take care of him. I'm the older sister." "And who took care of you?" The question seemed to catch the girl off guard. She was quiet for a moment, stirring the cereal with her spoon. "Mommy," she finally said. "She took care of both of us. Until she got sick." Michael sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer, but then in a small voice, "Mommy coughed a lot. Like Peter, only worse. We had no money for a good doctor. Then she couldn't get out of bed anymore," Emily continued, her voice monotonous, as if relating a story that had happened to someone else. "When she died, my dad cried a lot. Then he started drinking that stuff adults drink that smells bad. He'd go out and come back angry. One day he went out and never came back." The simplicity with which she recounted such a huge tragedy was devastating. Michael felt a lump in his throat. "Do you know where your dad might be?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know if he's alive. Sometimes I think he'll come back, but I guess he won't." "And how did you end up, Mosh, on the street?" "We couldn't pay for the place we lived in anymore. A man came and said we had to leave. I tried to find our aunt, but she moved away too." Michael watched Emily as she spoke. Despite her mere 5 years, there was a maturity in her eyes no child should have. She described losing her mother, being abandoned by her father, and surviving on the streets with the same objectivity another child might use to describe a day at school. "You know you shouldn't have had to go through that alone, right?" he said gently. "There are people who should have helped you." Emily looked at him, her dark eyes far too serious. "But nobody helped. Only you did." Those simple words hit Michael like a punch. How many times could he have helped someone and didn't, too busy with his acquisitions, his deals, his pursuit of more and more? Later that same day, Michael was working in his home office when his phone rang. Thomas again, sounding even more annoyed than before. "Michael, the board is demanding your presence at tomorrow's meeting. I can't keep making excuses for you." "Tom, I've already explained I'm dealing with an important personal situation." "Those kids," Thomas's voice grew more agitated. "Mike, this is out of control. We're about to close the biggest deal of the year, and you're playing babysitter to 2 street kids." Michael felt a cold anger flare inside him. "Don't talk about them like that. Look, I'm not trying to be insensitive, but you need to focus on what really matters. If you want to help underprivileged kids, do what everyone does. Donate to a charity and move on. It's not that simple." "Actually, it's exactly that simple," Thomas retorted. "I'm speaking as your friend and partner of over 15 years. You're jeopardizing everything we worked for because of a burst of social consciousness." "The shareholders are starting to ask questions, Mike." The conversation continued like that for several more minutes, Thomas alternating between appeals to reason and veiled threats about the consequences of Michael's continued absence. When it ended, Michael stared at the wall, lost in thought. He knew Thomas had a valid point from a business perspective. The company wouldn't stop just because he'd changed his priorities. Millions were at stake. Hundreds of jobs hinged on decisions only he could make. But for the first time in his career, Michael found he couldn't bring himself to care as he once had. Since Emily and Peter had entered his life, it was as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing the emptiness of his previous existence. What did a few more millions mean when he already had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes? What difference did another building with his name on it make? By late afternoon, Michael found the children in the garden. Peter ran around chasing Max, laughing as any 3-year-old should. Emily sat on the grass, watching her brother with a small but genuine smile, the first Michael had seen on her face. That was when he knew, with a certainty he'd never felt before, not even during the most critical business deals of his life. No matter the personal or professional cost, he wasn't going to abandon Emily and Peter. He wouldn't hand them over to an impersonal system that would likely separate them. He wouldn't back down on his promise. Because for the first time since he became wealthy, Michael Carter felt he was truly making a difference. Not with donation checks or philanthropic interviews, but directly, personally. And that feeling was worth more than any business deal in the world. 2 weeks had passed since Emily and Peter arrived at the mansion. Peter had fully recovered from his bronchitis, running around the house with the boundless energy of a 3-year-old. Emily, though still reserved, was gradually lowering her guard, at least when she thought no one was watching. Michael observed the children's changes with a mix of joy and concern. They were undeniably healthier. They'd gained weight, their once pale cheeks now a healthy pink. But he noticed they both still bore invisible scars from their time on the street. Peter continued hiding pieces of bread in his pockets during meals, as if worried the food might run out at any moment. Emily still woke up in the middle of the night to check on her brother, a habit formed by months of protecting him outdoors. That morning, while having breakfast, Michael had an idea. The kids needed more than physical safety and material comfort. They needed positive experiences, new memories to start overshadowing the painful ones. Emily, Peter, he called to them at the breakfast table. How would you like to do something different today? Peter, his mouth full of pancakes, looked up in curiosity. Emily, more cautious, waited for him to continue. I thought we could go somewhere special. Out of the city. Lots of open space and maybe even some animals to see. Why? Emily asked, always direct. Is it a holiday? No, Michael said with a smile. It's not a special date or anything, just a good day to spend together, a day that can be special just for us. Peter clapped his hands, already excited about the possibility of an adventure. Are we going to see animals? Yes, probably some animals. What kind of place? Emily pressed, still not convinced. I have a small property outside the city, not a big farm, just a cottage. There's a little lake, some forest trails, lots of room to run and explore. Peter's eyes sparkled with excitement. Even Emily seemed interested, though she tried to hide it. And when do we come back? She asked, demonstrating that constant worry about the future that broke Michael's heart. Later today, or we can spend the night if you like it. The house is simple but comfortable. Emily looked at Peter, who was practically bouncing in his seat, then back at Michael. I guess that would be nice, she finally said, allowing herself a small smile. An hour later, Michael's car pulled away from the city, following a winding road that climbed through the hills. The children stared out the windows, fascinated by the changing scenery. Buildings gave way to green fields and eventually a thick forest. Look, Emily, Peter exclaimed at each new sight. A cow! Look at all those trees. The sky is bluer here. Emily took it all in, just as intently, though she was quieter in her enthusiasm. Michael noticed she seemed to relax more as the city fell behind them, as if each passing mile lightened her burden. Michael's property stood on a small hill surrounded by trees on all sides, except for a clearing with a lake view. The house was modest compared to his mansion, a wooden structure with large windows and a wraparound porch. We're here, he announced, parking in front of the house. Before the car had fully stopped, Peter was already undoing his seatbelt, eager to explore. Emily helped him down, holding his hand tightly while looking around and absorbing every detail. It's so quiet, she commented, noting only the rustle of wind in the trees and the occasional bird call. That's one of my favorite things about this place, Michael agreed. No horns, sirens, or traffic noise. He opened the house, which was clean and aired out. He'd asked the caretaker to prepare it the day before. It was cozy, with simple but comfortable furniture, a stone fireplace, and large windows framing the scenery like living pictures. How about we explore outside a bit before lunch? Michael suggested, after the children had taken a quick look around. Peter was already at the door before he could finish the sentence. Emily followed, still holding her brother's hand, but walking with a lighter step than usual. Michael guided them along a gentle trail curving around the lake. The day was perfect, sunny with a cool breeze. He carried a small backpack with water, snacks, and a first aid kit, more as a precaution than a necessity. "What kind of fish is that?" Peter asked, pointing at a ripple in the lake. "Probably a trout," Michael replied. "There are many in this lake. Sometimes I come here to fish. Can we go fishing?" Peter's eyes lit up at the idea. "Sure. I didn't bring the gear today, but we can come back another day just for that." The mention of another day didn't escape Emily, who looked at Michael with an expression that was hard to decipher, hope mixed with caution, as if she didn't want to fully believe in the possibility of a stable future. They continued walking, with Michael pointing out different kinds of trees, birds, and plants. Peter soaked it all up with a child's natural curiosity, asking 1,000 questions. To Michael's surprise, Emily began showing interest too, especially in the wildflowers dotting the path. "That one's pretty," she said, kneeling to examine a tiny blue blossom. "That's a forget-me-not," Michael explained. "They're also called Don't Forget Me." "Don't forget me," Emily repeated softly, as if testing the words. They reached a small clearing overlooking the valley, and Michael spread out a picnic blanket he'd brought. They sat to eat sandwiches and fruit that Helena had prepared before they left. "I like it here," Peter declared between bites. "Can we stay here forever?" His innocent question hung in the air. Michael glanced at Emily, whose expression closed off again. "Well, this is my weekend house," Michael answered carefully. "But we can come here anytime you like." "But we'll still live at your big house," Peter pressed. "Yes, that's the plan," Michael confirmed, noticing how Emily watched him closely for reassurance. After the picnic, they continued exploring. Michael took them to a small creek where they spotted tadpoles and tiny frogs. Peter was delighted, laughing every time a frog leapt away with a splash. At one point, when Peter was distracted by a beetle, Emily approached Michael quietly. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. Michael thought for a moment before replying, "Because when I was a kid, I never had days like this. Days just to be a kid, you know? To explore, to play, not to worry about anything. I want you to have that." Emily nodded slowly. "Do you think we deserve it?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course you deserve it, all children do. Even if we're from the streets." Michael felt a tightening in his chest. He knelt down to her level. "Emily, you're not from the streets. You never were. You're children who went through hard times, that's all. You deserve every good thing life can offer." Something shifted in her expression, a shadow lifting, if only a little. She didn't smile, but her eyes lost some of their premature hardness. Later that afternoon, they found a wild apple tree loaded with small sweet fruit. Michael showed them how to check for ripeness and helped them pick a few. "These apples taste different," Emily remarked, biting into one. "Sweeter than the ones from the store." "That's because they're picked at just the right time, not early," Michael explained. "Most store fruit is picked before it's ripe, so it lasts longer on the shelves." They continued along the trail, now with pockets full of wild apples. When they began to tire, Michael suggested heading back to the house. The afternoon passed peacefully. Michael lit a fire in the fireplace, not because it was cold, but for the simple pleasure of watching the flames dance. They sat on a soft rug in front of it, where he started teaching the children a simple card game. Peter soon lost interest in the cards and turned to some toys Michael had brought, wooden blocks and small plastic animals. Emily, however, proved to be a quick learner, soon winning more rounds than she lost. "You're smart," Michael commented, after she won for the third time in a row. She shrugged out, but she couldn't quite hide the pride. "I like games where you have to think. Have you ever been to school?" he asked, taking advantage of the moment of openness. "A little, before Mom got sick. I liked math." Michael made a mental note to look into schooling options for the kids. Emily was clearly bright and eager to learn, despite the circumstances that had deprived her of formal education. For dinner, Michael prepared something simple, spaghetti with tomato sauce, which he had discovered was both children's favorite. They ate on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky orange and pink. "The sky's on fire," Peter remarked, wide-eyed. "It's just sunset," Emily explained, though she too watched with fascination. After dinner, Michael took out 3 flashlights and proposed a small adventure. "How about we go for a short walk to see the stars? Away from the city lights, the sky is amazing at night." Peter, despite being tired, was immediately excited. Emily looked hesitant. "Isn't it dangerous to walk in the dark?" "We won't go far, just up that little hill," Michael assured, pointing, "and we have flashlights." He handed them each a flashlight, and they stepped into the mild evening. The air was fresh, filled with night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. When they reached the top of the small rise, Michael suggested turning off the flashlights. After a moment's hesitation, the children complied. Darkness enveloped them for a moment, until their eyes adjusted. Then, as if a veil had been lifted, the sky above emerged in all its glory, a tapestry of stars so dense and bright it seemed unreal. "Wow," Peter whispered, genuinely speechless for the first time that day. Emily remained silent, her face turned upward, completely enthralled by the sight. The starlight reflected in her eyes, and Michael realized he'd never seen her so relaxed, so childlike. "There are so many," she finally said, her voice full of wonder. "More than we can count," Michael agreed. "In the city, with all the lights, we can't see half of them." They stayed there for a while, just staring at the sky. Peter eventually yawned, leaning against Michael's leg in a gesture of natural trust that would have been unthinkable a few weeks before. "I think someone's ready for bed," Michael said softly, turning his flashlight back on. They returned to the house, Peter almost asleep on his feet, holding onto Michael's hand on one side and Emily's on the other. An unspoken bond that neither adult missed. Back inside, Michael helped the children get ready for bed in the cozy bedroom with 2 small beds he'd prepared. Peter fell asleep almost instantly, worn out from the day's adventures. Emily Corn, however, sat on the edge of her bed as if she had something to say. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, sitting in a nearby chair. She nodded, looking down at her hands. "Today was nice. I'm glad you liked it." "Michael," she began, using his name without hesitation for the first time, "thank you for all of this." Something in her tone suggested she meant more than just that day's outing. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. It's a pleasure to share this with you." She looked at him then, her dark eyes serious. Nobody cared like this after Mom died." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "Well, I do care, a lot." Emily nodded, as if she'd made an important decision. "Good night, Michael." "Good night, Emily. Sleep well." Later, sitting alone on the porch, watching the same stars that had amazed the children, Michael reflected on the day. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so peaceful or so in the moment. Not even his greatest professional achievements, the multi-million-dollar company acquisitions, the construction of his financial empire, had given him the simple joy he felt upon seeing Peter's delight at a frog or Emily's wonder at the starry sky. It was as though, in trying to give the children something they had never experienced, he himself had received an unexpected gift, the rediscovery of a genuine human connection, something money couldn't buy. The bond forming between them was still fragile, built on uncertain ground. He knew challenges lay ahead, legal questions, red tape, perhaps even the reappearance of their absent father. But at that moment, under the starry blanket of the night, and with the soft sound of 2 sleeping children within the house, Michael felt a deep certainty that they were on the right path. That special day was only the beginning. The dining room table in Michael's mansion, usually reserved for occasional business dinners, had been turned into a makeshift office. Stacks of forms, documents, and files lay spread out in a pattern only Michael seemed to follow. He ran his fingers through his hair, making it even more disheveled as he reread the same paragraph for the 3rd time. "More coffee, Mr. Carter?" Helena asked, entering quietly. "Please," he replied, not lifting his eyes from the papers. "It feels like the more documents I fill out, the more they multiply." Helena poured the coffee and glanced at the volume of paperwork. The custody process is always bureaucratic. When I adopted my niece after my sister's death, I went through something similar. Michael looked up, surprised. I didn't know you adopted someone, Helena. It was many years ago, sir. She's in college now. Helena smiled. And it was worth every form, every interview, every headache. The housekeeper had become Michael's greatest ally in pursuing provisional custody of Emily and Peter. She was the one who had suggested the first social worker, who helped gather evidence that the children were well cared for, photos of them engaged in activities, medical records showing their improved health, even a daily journal documenting their routine. Mrs. Reynolds called to confirm her visit tomorrow, Helena reminded him. Michael nodded. Patricia Reynolds was the assigned social worker, a serious, meticulous woman who had already made 2 preliminary visits. Tomorrow would be the formal home evaluation. I've prepared the children's room, Helena continued, and James managed to get those school documents you requested. James D., Michael's assistant, had surprised everyone by becoming an unexpected supporter. After his initial resistance, he ended up actively assisting, using his contacts to speed things up and gather information. It's more efficient to handle this properly than to keep resisting, he explained, when Michael expressed surprise at his change of heart. Not all staff were as enthusiastic, though. Through Helena, Michael knew some still questioned the children's presence. Mr. Donovan asked how much longer the kids will be here, Helena said, referring to the chauffeur who had served the Carter family for more than a decade. He said he finds it inappropriate having children running around the garden he's tended for years. Michael took a deep breath. That garden has never been so well used. Gardens are made for children to play in, not just to be admired. I told him something along those lines, Helena said with a slight smile. At that moment, a patter of small footsteps sounded in the hallway, followed by childish laughter. Peter burst into the room, followed by Emily, who walked more calmly but with a faint smile on her face. Mike! Mike! Peter called, using the nickname he'd recently adopted for Michael. Look what I made. He held up a piece of paper covered in colorful scribbles that could, with some imagination, be seen as a human figure holding 2 smaller figures. It's you, me, and Emily, Peter explained proudly. Michael took the drawing with the reverence he might show a masterpiece. It's amazing, Peter. Let's hang it on the fridge. Peter grinned and ran off to show the drawing to Helena as well. Emily walked up more slowly to the table, eyeing the papers curiously. That's a lot of papers, she observed. Yes, it is, Michael agreed. I'm filling out forms so you can officially stay here. Emily's eyes widened a bit. Is it like adoption? Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. For now, I'm asking for provisional custody. That means I'll have legal permission to take care of you while your father's situation is clarified. Mentioning her father made Emily tense up. She glanced at Peter, who was busy showing Helena his drawing, and lowered her voice. Do you think he'll show up? I don't know, Emily. The social workers have to make an effort to find him. It's part of the process. She nodded thoughtfully. Michael could almost see the gears turning in her young but all too grown mind. And if he does show up, she asked finally, will we have to go with him? Not necessarily, Michael answered, trying to sound more confident than he felt. His lawyer had made it clear that parental rights were taken very seriously by the courts, and that the father's absence, while alarming, wasn't automatically grounds to terminate his rights. Emily, he said softly, I want you to know I'll do everything I can to make sure you and Peter stay safe and happy, no matter what happens. She studied his face for a moment, as if searching for any sign of dishonesty or hesitation. You promise? I promise. Emily looked at the papers again. We're not bothering you. There's so much for you to do. So many papers. Michael felt the familiar ache in his chest, an odd blend of tenderness and pain he often felt when Emily spoke. You're not bothering me, Emily. Never. He hesitated, unsure how to express what he felt without scaring her. You're very important to me. These papers are just formalities. It's worth it. Peter came running back, cutting the moment short. Helena said we can make cookies. Can we help? Emily glanced at her brother, then at Michael, as if asking permission. Michael smiled. Of course you can. Show me what you bake afterward. As the children went off with Helena, Michael returned to the forms, now more determined than ever. Each signature, each document brought him one step closer to ensuring a stable future for Emily and Peter. That night, after the children were asleep, Michael received a visit from his lawyer, Alan Mercer, a middle-aged man with a reputation for achieving the impossible in family law cases. "How are we doing?" Michael asked, offering him a whiskey. "Well, considering the circumstances," Alan replied, accepting the drink. "I have good news and bad news. Let's start with the good news. Judge Morgan is inclined to grant provisional custody. The initial reports from the social worker are positive, and it's clear the children are well taken care of here." Michael nodded, feeling some relief. "And the bad? We still need to locate the father. The court has ordered a more thorough search before rendering a final decision." Alan took a sip of his whiskey. "And there's another issue, your public profile." "What about it?" "Michael, you're a single man known for, let's call it, an intense lifestyle. Parties, short relationships, constant travel. It's not exactly the kind of environment courts see as ideal for children." Michael frowned. "That was in the past. I haven't thrown any parties in years, and as for relationships," he gestured vaguely, "they haven't exactly been a priority." "I know, but the image persists. Judge Morgan specifically mentioned your reputation." "What do you suggest I do?" Alan pondered for a moment. "Keep doing what you're doing. Show stability. Tomorrow's visit is crucial. Show that your home has become a real place for these kids. And maybe," he hesitated, "maybe consider making some public statements about your new stance. Something regarding social responsibility, family values." Michael shook his head. "I'm not going to use the kids as PR pawns. If I need to change public perception, I'll do it genuinely, not as a strategy." Alan offered a small smile. "That's exactly the attitude the judge needs to see." After the lawyer left, Michael quietly walked to the children's room. The door was ajar, and he could make out their small shapes in the dim light. Peter slept on his stomach, one arm hanging off the bed, while Emily slept on her side, a hand tucked under her cheek. It was remarkable how, in such a short time, these two little people had changed not just his routine but his own identity. Before it, he was Michael Carter, successful businessman, occasional philanthropist. Now he was simply Mike to a 3-year-old who ran to show him scribbled drawings. The transformation hadn't been without resistance, both external and internal. There was still much to solve, many obstacles to overcome. The specter of their absent father, the red tape of the adoption system, doubts about his fitness as a guardian. But looking at Emily and Peter sleeping peacefully, knowing they were safe, fed, and cared for, Michael felt a deep certainty that he was on the right path no matter the challenges. Tomorrow would be another day. The social worker would come. More documents would be filled out. More steps taken toward a permanent resolution. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, but Michael was determined to see it through. For Emily, for Peter, and, in a way, for the child he himself had been, the one who never received the second chance he could now offer. The family court was more welcoming than Michael had expected. Far from the intimidating pomp of criminal courts, the hearing room had an almost informal air, with comfortable chairs and neutral colors on the walls, perhaps a conscious effort to ease the tension of families fighting for their children's futures. Michael straightened his tie for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Next to him, Alan Mercer organized some final documents. "Relax," Alan murmured. "Everything is in order. Judge Morgan has already reviewed all the reports, and they're extremely favorable." Michael nodded, but his nerves weren't about doubts over the outcome. In recent weeks, all signs indicated the court would grant him full custody. The social worker had been impressed with the environment he'd created, the children's visible improvements in health and well-being, and the clear bond they'd formed. Michael's anxiety stemmed from a fear of disappointing Emily and Peter. They'd spent the entire morning preparing for what Helena called, "The special day will become a real family." Peter wore a tiny dress shirt and pants Helena had bought just for the occasion. Emily wore a simple dress, the first she'd agreed to wear since arriving at the mansion. The children now waited in an adjacent room, supervised by Helena. Michael insisted they didn't need the stress of the full hearing. They'd only be called in for a brief conversation with the judge and for the final announcement. Case number 47392, petition for permanent custody of Emily and Peter Donovan, announced the court clerk. Judge Morgan, a middle-aged black woman with keen eyes, adjusted her glasses while reviewing some papers. "Mr. Carter," she began, "we've extensively reviewed your custody request. Miss Reynolds's reports are impressive. I rarely see children adapting so well to a new environment in so little time." Michael felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Your Honor. They're extraordinary." The judge allowed herself a slight smile. "I see you've developed a genuine bond with them. That's clear from all the reports." "They changed my life," Michael replied, surprising even himself with his honesty. "There's only one pending issue," the judge continued. "As you know, we've made every legal effort to locate the children's father, as required by law. Notices have been published. Searches in public records have been conducted." Michael nodded. This was the last formality before a final decision. After months of fruitless searching, the court would declare the father legally absent, removing the final obstacle to permanent custody. "No contact or response to the notices," the judge confirmed, flipping through some documents. "Therefore, I'm inclined to declare that all reasonable efforts to locate the biological father have been made," and the rear door of the courtroom burst open with a bang, interrupting the judge. A man rushed in, followed by a bailiff who seemed to be trying to stop him. "I apologize for being late, Your Honor," the man said, breathless. "I'm David Donovan, the father of Emily and Peter." A stunned silence fell over the room. Michael turned slowly, finally seeing the face of the man who had abandoned the children. The shock that hit him felt like a punch to the gut. He knew that face. It wasn't just a face from the recent past. The man who had left two small kids to fend for themselves. It was a face from a much earlier time. "Dave?" The word left Michael's lips before he could stop it. The man looked at him, eyes widening in recognition. Michael Carter." The judge glanced from one to the other, clearly puzzled. "You two know each other?" Michael could barely speak. His mind struggled to process this impossible coincidence. David Donovan. Davy. His childhood friend from the impoverished neighborhood where they'd both grown up. The boy who shared his lunch when Michael had none. The one who helped him care for his sick mother in her final months. "Yes, Your Honor," David said, recovering more quickly than Michael. "We grew up together. Same neighborhood. Same poverty." Alan Mercer touched Michael's arm, trying to bring him back to the present. "Michael, what's going on?" Michael took a deep breath, forcing himself to speak. "It's true, Your Honor. David and I were childhood friends. We haven't seen each other in over 20 years. The judge adjusted her glasses, her gaze now laser-focused. "This is, at the very least, an extraordinary coincidence, Mr. Carter. Were you aware the children you're trying to adopt are your old friends?" "No," Michael answered honestly. "Emily never mentioned her father's last name, and David is a common name. There was no reason for me to make the connection." David remained standing, looking uncomfortable near the entrance. He looked different from the boy Michael remembered. Older, of course, and worn down by life. Deep lines creased his face, and his eyes held a fatigue that went beyond lack of sleep. Yet he was still Davy, without a doubt. "Mr. Donovan," the judge addressed him, "please take a seat. We have much to discuss." David walked to the table opposite Michael's. Their eyes met briefly, and Michael saw a mixture of shame, regret, and something else, maybe hope. "Mr. Donovan," the judge said, "are you aware that you abandoned your children about 8 months ago, leaving them in an extremely vulnerable situation?" David lowered his head. "Yes, Your Honor. And there's not a single day I don't deeply regret it. Would you care to explain your actions?" David glanced briefly at Michael before turning back to the judge. "After my wife, Claire, died, I fell apart. I started drinking, lost my job. I couldn't pay the rent. Every time I looked at my children, I saw her face and I couldn't bear it." He paused, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. "I thought it would be better for them if I stepped away for a while, until I got myself together. I left them with a neighbor who promised to take care of them while I sought help. When I came back 2 weeks later, she'd moved away. No one knew where they'd gone. And then, the judge pressed, I spent months searching. I went to the police, shelters, walked the streets. Finally, I saw one of the legal notices in the paper with their names. I came as fast as I could. Michael looked at his old friend, trying to reconcile the loyal boy he once knew with the man who had abandoned his own children. It was a difficult reconciliation. Mr. Donovan, the judge continued, do you understand that during your absence, your children lived on the streets? They went hungry, endured the cold, and your 5-year-old daughter had to take responsibility for your 3-year-old son. David's face twisted with pain. I didn't know. I never imagined the neighbor would leave them. So I never wanted this to happen. Intent and outcome are different things, Mr. Donovan, the judge replied, firm but not unkind. The fact remains that your children suffered immensely because of your actions. The judge turned her attention to Michael. Mr. Carter, this turn of events has completely changed the nature of this case. The biological father not only appeared, but also has a prior connection to you. We need to address this carefully. Michael nodded, feeling oddly detached, as though witnessing the scene from outside his own body. I'm going to call the children in, the judge decided. They need to be informed of these developments, and I'd like to observe their reaction to seeing their father. Minutes later, Helena entered with Emily and Peter. They smiled upon seeing Michael, but those smiles froze when they noticed the stranger at the other table. Peter was the first to react. He tilted his head as though trying to recall something important. Emily, on the other hand, stood rooted to the spot, the color draining from her face. Dad! The word came out as a whisper. David stood slowly, tears shining in his eyes. Emily, Peter, I found you. What followed was a moment of pure emotional confusion. After a brief hesitation, Peter ran into his father's arms, his childhood memory overriding the trauma of abandonment. Emily remained where she was, gripping Helena's hand like an anchor in a storm. You left, Emily said, her voice small but accusing. You abandoned us. I know, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry. More sorry than I can ever explain, David replied, holding Peter against his chest while extending a hand toward his daughter. I came back to find you, but I couldn't. Emily looked at Michael, her eyes pleading for guidance, for answers. Michael felt his heart splitting in 2 directions. On one hand, he knew what it was like to grow up fatherless. He knew that emptiness. Emily and Peter deserved a chance to have their father back, if he was truly repentant and committed. On the other hand, he'd formed a deep bond with these children. The thought of losing them felt like having a piece of himself torn away. And there was a legitimate fear. David had abandoned them once. What was to stop him from doing it again? Emily, Michael said softly, it's okay. We can talk about this, all of us together. The judge, observing intently, intervened. I think we all need time to process this situation. I'm suspending this hearing and rescheduling it for a week from now. She looked pointedly at David. Mr. Donovan, you left your children. That cannot be ignored. However, I recognize the effort you've made to locate them and your apparent desire to resume your parental responsibilities. Then she turned to Michael. Mr. Carter, your commitment to these children is exemplary. The court acknowledges and values all you've done for them. Finally, addressing the children, she said, Emily and Peter, you are very brave. And you should know that every adult in this room wants the best for you. The judge struck her gavel. This hearing is adjourned until next week. I hope that in the meantime, the adults involved can find a solution that truly puts these children's well-being first. The silence that followed felt heavy as lead. Peter still clung to his father, looking confused at Michael, as if wondering why he couldn't have both. Emily finally moved, not toward her father but toward Michael, holding his hand tight. I don't want to go, she whispered, softly enough that only Michael could hear. Nothing will happen that you don't want, Michael promised, aware that it might be a promise he couldn't keep. David looked at them, the pain clear on his face. He had lost his daughter's trust, and regaining that bond, if possible, would be a long, difficult process. As they left the courtroom, the future that had seemed so certain just hours ago was now wrapped in fog. Michael glanced at his old friend, carrying Peter, and at Emily, clinging to his hand as if her life depended on it. The story had taken a turn no one could have foreseen. Now everyone was walking a tightrope between past and future, between what had been lost and what might still be saved. The next 3 months brought transformation for everyone involved. Michael offered David a small apartment in one of his buildings, not far from his mansion. It was modest compared to Michael's lavish home, but far better than anything David could afford on his own at that point. "I can't accept this," David said when Michael made the offer soon after the postponed hearing. "I've already lost my pride by abandoning my kids. I don't want to lose what's left by accepting charity." Michael looked at his childhood friend with a mix of compassion and firmness. "It's not charity, Dave. It's an opportunity for you and for your kids. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I'll take it out of your salary." And so it was. Michael not only provided housing, but also a job in one of the companies he controlled. Not a high-profile position, but something suitable for David's former skills as a mechanic. It was honest work, with regular hours and a wage that would eventually let him be independent. More importantly, Michael insisted David attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and sessions with a grief counselor. The cost was high, but Michael insisted on covering it, seeing it not as a favor to David, but as a necessity for Emily and Peter. "They need a sober father who's emotionally stable," Michael explained. "You owe them that." David didn't argue. Deep down, he knew Michael was right, and he proved surprisingly willing to do whatever was necessary. Years ago, maybe he would have resisted out of pride, but the experience of losing his children had broken something inside him, something that needed to break to allow for a better version of himself to emerge. His reunification with the children was gradual, carefully supervised by social workers. Initially, just a few hours of visits at Michael's mansion, always with Michael present. Peter adapted quickly, his short memory and open heart making it easier to reconnect with his dad. Emily, however, maintained her wariness. "Are you going away again?" she asked David directly during one of his first visits, her eyes guarded, her posture tense as if bracing for a hurtful answer. David looked at his daughter, unshed tears shining in his eyes. "No, Emily. Never again. I made the worst mistake of my life leaving you, and I'll spend the rest of my days making up for it." She studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for a lie. "That's what everyone says." "I know," he acknowledged, not denying the truth in her words. "Words are easy. I'll have to prove it with actions, day after day." From a respectful distance, Michael observed the interaction with both pain and hope. Pain, because, ultimately, the children might go back to living with their father. Hope, because that was how it should be if David truly was better. It wasn't about what Michael wanted, but about what was best for Emily and Peter. In the weeks that followed, David never missed a visit. He never arrived late, never showed the slightest sign of drinking, never bad-mouthed Michael or tried to diminish his role in the children's lives. On the contrary, he often expressed his gratitude openly. "If it weren't for you, Mike, my kids might be dead by now, or worse, separated by the system, growing up not knowing each other," he said one day, while the children played in the garden. "How can I ever thank you for that?" "By being the father they deserve," Michael replied simply. After 2 months of supervised visits, the social worker recommended that the children spend a full weekend at their father's apartment. Emily hesitated, looking to Michael for reassurance. "I'll be only 15 minutes away," he promised, "and you can call me any time." The weekend went well, and went. David prepared simple but nutritious meals, read them bedtime stories, and took them to a local park. When Michael went to pick them up on Sunday night, he found Emily less tense than he'd expected. "It was nice," she admitted on the drive back to the mansion. "Dad made pancakes for breakfast, just like Mom used to." Michael felt a pang of something he refused to label as jealousy. "I'm glad you had a good time." "But I missed the house," Emily added quickly, "and Helena, and you." Her words warmed his heart in a way no professional success ever had. The final custody hearing was scheduled exactly 3 months after David's reappearance. All the reports, from social workers, therapists, David's work supervisors, pointed in the same direction. He had made remarkable progress and was genuinely committed to his recovery and his children. "I've never seen such a rapid and significant turnaround," wrote the social worker Patricia Reynolds in her final report. "Mr. Donovan shows not only continued sobriety, but also a profound understanding of his past mistakes and unwavering commitment to the future." On the day of the hearing, Michael, David, and the children arrived together at the courthouse. The tension from their first appearance had lessened, replaced by a different kind of nervousness, like a family on the verge of turning an important page. Judge Morgan, who had presided over the case from the start, examined all the documents with her usual attention to detail. When she finally looked at the 4 of them sitting before her, her stern expression softened slightly. "This is one of those rare cases that gives me hope in the system," she began. "Mr. Donovan, you've demonstrated an exemplary commitment to your recovery and to your children. The reports unanimously affirm you're on the right track." David nodded humbly. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Mr. Carter," the judge continued, "your role in this story is equally remarkable. Rather than use your considerable resources to fight the children's biological father, you chose to help him. That kind of generosity is rare in the cases I see." Michael simply nodded, his hand resting lightly on Emily's shoulder, who sat between him and David. "Emily and Peter," the judge addressed them directly, "you've been through a lot for one so young. But you've also been very lucky, you know. Not all children have adults willing to fight so hard for them." Peter swung his legs, which barely reached the floor, giving a small smile. Emily remained serious, but there was a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "After weighing all factors," the judge went on, "my decision is to grant legal custody of the children to their father, Mr. David Donovan, with a 3-month transition period, during which they will continue living primarily with Mr. Carter, but spend increasingly longer visits with their father." David closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the weight of the ruling. Michael felt Emily's small body tense beside him. "However," the judge added, "given the emotional bonds that have formed, I'm also granting Mr. Carter broad, regular visitation rights as a permanent figure in these children's lives." This time it was Michael who felt the impact of her words. He wouldn't lose Emily and Peter completely. He would remain part of their lives. "Mr. Donovan, Mr. Carter," the judge concluded, "you both have a rare opportunity here. These children can have not only a rehabilitated father, but also another adult who loves and cares for them deeply. I hope you'll both see it for the blessing it is." As they left the courthouse, the spring air felt lighter, fresher. Peter ran ahead, chasing a sparrow, while the adults walked side by side, Emily in between. "So that's that," David said. "In 3 months, they'll be living with me." "Yes," Michael replied calmly, despite the flood of emotion inside him. "But it doesn't mean I'm out of their lives." "No," David said firmly. "In fact, I was thinking, that apartment near your place. Maybe I'll stay there even after I can afford something else." Michael looked at his friend, understanding what he was implying. It's a good neighborhood for kids, and close enough for frequent visits, maybe even Sunday dinners. Emily, who had been listening quietly, squeezed both their hands. "So we can have 2 homes?" Her question, so simple and direct, touched both men deeply. "Yes," Michael said, smiling at her. "I think you can." 6 months later, on a sunny Sunday, Michael's mansion was unusually noisy. In the backyard, a long table was set under the trees. Helena oversaw a small army of staff making sure everything was perfect for an outdoor lunch. David arrived right on time, carrying a pie he had made himself, not very pretty but with obvious care. Emily and Peter ran to greet him, excitedly sharing the week's news, even though they had seen him just 2 days before. Michael watched from the porch, a sense of fulfillment he had never felt before filling his chest. His life had changed entirely since that night at the restaurant, when a little girl approached him with an empty plate. "Coffee, sir?" Helena offered, stepping up with a tray. "Thank you, Helena." He took the cup, glancing at David, now playing tag with Peter, while Emily laughed, a sound that had become more and more common. "Do you know," Helena said, following his gaze, When Mr. Donovan showed up, I thought that was the end, that you'd lose the children and go back to being how you were before. Michael gave a small smile. I thought so too for a moment. But look at it now, she gestured toward the yard, where Emily had climbed onto her father's back, laughing as he pretended to be a horse. It's as if you've gained an entire family, not just 2 children. Michael nodded, her words resonating deeply. It was true. He had gained not only the ongoing presence of Emily and Peter in his life, but also the renewal of an old friendship, strengthened by a shared purpose. David waved, calling Michael over to join the fun, an invitation that would have seemed strange months before, but now felt perfectly natural. As he descended the steps toward his expanded family, not defined by blood or legal paperwork, but by choice and daily commitment, Michael thought again of that brave girl with an empty plate. How could he have known that moment of compassion would lead him here? This wasn't the ending he'd envisioned when he decided to seek custody of the children. It was in many ways something better, something more complete. A redemption not just for David but for himself, a chance to heal not only the children's present, but also his own past. Come on, Mike, Peter called, running over to grab his hand. Dad's going to teach us to play baseball. Michael let himself be led onto the sunlit lawn, into the circle of laughter and affection that now defined his life. A new path had opened up, unplanned, unexpected, but infinitely precious, and it all began with an empty plate and a heart willing to care.